Hello, and welcome to the world's best Python bootcamp. My name is Angela, I'm a senior developer and the lead instructor at the Appbury, London's highest rated programming bootcamp. To date, I've taught over 500,000 students in person and online, and I'm so excited to be your instructor on this course. As a student on this course, you're going to get access to over 56 hours of HD video content, which contains step-by-step tutorials, interactive coding exercises, quizzes, and more. The course is structured around the 100 Days of Code challenge. So you can look forwards to 100 days of lovingly crafted content that is going to cover every aspect of Python programming, from web development to data science. It's the only course you need to become a professional Python developer. Every day on the course, you're going to use what you've learned to build a new project. You'll build a bot that texts you in the morning if it will rain that day, so you never forget your umbrella again. You'll build classic arcade games like Snake and Pong to impress your friends by challenging them to a game that you built. You'll learn to make sense of complex data and create beautiful visualizations to impress your colleagues at work. You'll create a program that automatically sends happy birthday emails to your friends and family. Never forget mom's birthday again. You'll work on projects that clone real-world startups. Cheap Flight Club? Check. Build your own blog? Check. Twitter bot? Check. And there are so many more projects waiting to be discovered by you. 100 projects in total. So if you're somebody who wants to get a job as a Python developer, then this is perfect for building up your portfolio to show off at your next interview. Now, this course assumes absolutely no prior programming experience. So if you're somebody who's never coded before, I'll be with you every step of the way as I take you from programming fundamentals through to more intermediate and advanced programming concepts. You're going to learn Python from scratch. Now, if you're an advanced developer, on the other hand, then take a look at the curriculum and start at the level that suits you best. From beginner to professional, every level is covered in the course. Got school? Working a full-time job? Have to look after kids? I know you're busy. I've timed each day of the course to take less than 2 hours to complete, so you can fit the course around your life. This course has exactly the same curriculum as our in-person programming bootcamp. So instead of spending thousands of dollars and taking time off work, you'll get access to exactly the same curriculum with years of design and testing behind it to ensure that you don't just know what to do, but also why you're doing it. Now, don't just take my word for it. Check out what my past students had to say about my courses. So what are you still waiting for? Find out why over 500,000 students have rated my course 5 stars and see what you can do by mastering Python. Hi, this is where you start the course. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about it, because this is more than a course. It's a journey, and it's a challenge to yourself. I often hear people say, I want to learn to code, I want to become an app developer, I want a new job, I want to build my app. But without action, those words are meaningless. But you are different. I know it. Even though I don't know you personally, I know you purchased this course and you haven't left it at that. You've made a start, and success comes to those who show up, and you showed up today. I know you can do this. You can make your dreams come true. You can change your own future, and you can change the lives of those people around you. One of the questions I hear most often is, what's the best way to learn to code? Well, here it is. It's the 100 Days of Code challenge. Code for at least an hour over 100 days. You're practicing a muscle to get strong at coding. Then the next question, inevitably, is, well, what do I do each day? And I've spent years thinking about this question. And finally, I'm now able to definitively answer that. It's this course. Every day, you're going to learn and apply new programming concepts. After 100 days of repeating this process, not only will you have covered the entire professional Python curriculum, you'll also be so good that they can't ignore you. There are just 2 rules to get the most out of this course. 1. Pledge to code for an hour a day for 100 days. To keep yourself accountable, I recommend downloading the course pledge. This is a contract with yourself. You can print it out and pin it somewhere you can always see, for example above your computer or on your desk. By signing the pledge, you're making a commitment to yourself. It's only for you. No one else needs to see it. You can download the pledge in the course resources for this lesson. The second rule is to log your progress using the 100 Days of Code hashtag on Twitter. There are millions of other students who are on this journey with you, and they will support you when times get tough. I recommend tweeting your progress each day with the hashtag 100 Days of Code and search the hashtag on Twitter to see what others are doing as a part of their 100 days. And that's all there is to it. So here's to your success, and let's get started with the course.
Hey guys, it's Angela here. After I made this course, I decided to take it myself so I could see what it's like to be in your shoes. Along the way, I realized there are things we could create to make your learning experience easier and even more enjoyable. So in this video, I'm going to share my top tips and how to use all the tools and resources we built for you. The first tip I have for you is to use another screen. That way you can watch the lesson on a tablet or phone and code on your main computer. So you can code along with me and get practice instead of just listening to the videos. Programming is a practical skill, so just as you need practice when learning skateboarding, you also need practice to get good at programming. Tip number 2. I created a Python syntax cheat sheet, which you can download and print out. It contains some of the most common programming concepts we'll learn, and it's a handy reference to have when you're doing the coding challenges. You can download this in the course resources for this lesson, where you'll also find my 12 Rules to Learn to Code ebook. One of the hardest things about learning is keeping the motivation high. I find I'm usually more motivated when I'm in the library or a cafe where I can see other people studying or working hard. So I decided to create a 2-hour study with me video where I'm concentrating hard. We'll work for 25 minutes at a time and then take a 5-minute break before we get back to the next Pomodoro. Tip number 4. When you're learning new programming concepts, it's a good idea to note down how the code works while your mind is fresh on that topic. So I created a coding notes page that you can print out and collate to create a coding notebook. The note paper is the perfect place to write down examples of coding concepts you've learnt. It comes with line numbers and handy indentation guides, which is super useful when it comes to writing out Python code. Coding is not like history. There's nothing you need to memorize. It's a bit like baking. You don't need to remember the recipe. You just need to get practice and understand how to use the recipe. One of the most helpful note-taking systems for learning is the Cornell Note method. In our coding notebook, we've incorporated all the key elements from Cornell, including the sidebar, where you can write comments on each line of code, and the bottom summary section, where you can write an overview of the concept you just learned. In the course resources for this lesson, you'll also find some desktop wallpapers I've created for you. They contain some of the messages I keep around my desk to keep me motivated, and I hope they'll help you too. Tip number 5. Celebrate after you complete each day. Because this course is designed to take you from beginner to professional, as you go from day to day, there will be less and less tutorial and more practice. To keep you on track, I've created a 100 days of code poster. Once you complete a day, you can check it off on the poster. So print it out, put it up on a wall, and take each day as a challenge. Reward yourself after each day you tick off, and day by day you'll learn and grow as a developer. This course is a safe space where you can make mistakes, ask questions, but most importantly, become confident in your skills as a programmer. I had so much fun building this course, and I hope that you'll enjoy it as much as I did. So here's to your success. Hey guys, welcome to day 1 of your 100-day journey. And today we're going to learn about printing, commenting, debugging, string manipulation, and variables. So it's chock-a-block full of really fun stuff. And by the end of today, you will have created a band name generator program. So this is the final project of today. And the idea is that, let's say that your friend was starting a new band, a rock band or a classical band, and they're struggling to come up with a good name. So you come into the rescue and send them your band name generator program. So it asks you for the name of the city that you grew up in. So mine was Bristol in the southwest of the UK. And then it'll ask you what's the name of your pet. I had a pet rabbit when I was younger, and I am probably the least imaginative person, classic programmer personality. So I called my rabbit Rabbit. So now when I hit enter, it's going to give me my band name. And it could be Bristol Rabbit. So that sounds pretty cool. It could be like a rock band. So this is what you're going to make. And in the process, in order to create this, you're going to learn about printing, inputting, commenting, debugging, name errors, syntax errors, string manipulation, variables, and a whole lot more. So if you feel like you can already achieve this and you can prove it by making this program yourself, then feel free to skip to the next day's lessons. But for most of you, even if you've started learning Python programming, there's probably still a lot of new things that you'll find in today's lessons. Now, as with all the projects that we're making in this course, you get to try it out before you make it. So you can either go to the URL. Alternatively, if you don't want to type out the full URL, you can head over to the course content here and then click on the resources and click this link to head straight over there. And then once you're there, all you have to do is to click run, and you'll be able to preview how the final product is going to work. So you can type in your own city and follow the instructions until you get to the end result. So once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started and get coding straight away. To begin, open up your browser and head over to this URL. Now, if you didn't want to type all of that out and make some typos and errors and not get to the right place, then simply just head over to the course resources and click on the link there. It'll take you directly to this page. Now, once you've clicked on the link that takes you to the starting Replit, you should see something that looks like this. And the first thing I want you to do is to go ahead and click on the fork button. What this is going to do is it's going to create a version of that same Replit that you'll see me working through in the videos, but in this case, you'll be able to edit it. So if you want to save the work that you're doing, I recommend signing up to Replit. It's completely free. You don't need any credit cards or anything. Once you've created your account on Replit, it will take you to the previous page where you can now actually click the fork REPL button. And what that will do is it'll create a copy of what I've created and put it into your account. And then you'll be able to see a record of all of the code that you've written throughout the course. In this course, you'll be coding along with me on Replit and completing a whole bunch of interactive coding exercises in our Replit classroom. So go ahead, pause the video, sign up to Replit, and make sure you've forked the starting copy of Day 1 Printing Start, and you should be on a screen that looks like this. And once you're signed in, then you can actually go ahead and edit the name of the Replit or add a brief description, and you'll be able to access it later on through the My REPLs folder. Now, once you've done that, then let's go ahead and walk through some of the different parts of Replit that you'll be using. First, on the left-hand side pane here, you've got some files, and you can see the current file that's open is this Python file here. And you can create new files or you can create new folders, and later on we'll be using these features to organize our code. Now, the other part of the left-hand side pane that's really useful is this settings tab here. And I recommend everybody to switch their font size up to large. This just makes it so much easier to identify mistakes and any typos you make. Now, we're going to leave everything else as it is, and you can click on the settings button to collapse that pane so that you end up with more space for writing code. And this area here is where you're going to be doing that. All of your code is going to go inside here, and once we're done with writing our code, we'll click run and it will execute, and the results of our code will come up over on the console in the right here. And I generally prefer to code using a darker background. It's slightly easier on my eyes, especially when you're working at night. So these are some of the most important parts of Replit, but the important thing is it allows us to just get started. Now remember that the whole reason why we're learning to program is to be able to tell the computer what it needs to do and for it to follow our commands. So let's go ahead and tell the computer to do something. And we're going to do that by writing our first line of code. So in this case, I'm creating something called a print function, which is just the word print, all in lowercase, and then followed by a set of parentheses. Now, inside these parentheses, I'm going to tell it what I want it to print. And hopefully it's going to output that inside our console. So I'm going to start off by writing the classic hello world inside here. And then once you're ready, then go ahead and click run. After a few seconds, you should see the computer follow your command, namely printing the words that you told it to print inside the console or the output area over here. And once it's done, it indicates that with the little orange arrow. And the way that this command works is super simple. You have the keyword print followed by a set of parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, you tell it what you want it to print. And once you've inserted that, then when this line of code gets executed by the computer, it'll know to simply print or output the thing that you've placed in between the parentheses. But notice here that it's not just the word hello world exclamation mark that I've put inside my parentheses. I've also added some quotation marks or double quotes around the word. And the reason why I've done this is so that I can tell the computer that this bit here in between the double quotes is not code. It's not like print where it's supposed to do something. This is just some text that I've made up that I want it to print out. And these pieces of text in programming lingo is known as strings. And you can imagine it as almost like a pearl necklace, right? It's a string of characters. And what the double quotes do is they basically show the beginning and the end of that string of characters. So that means you have to be really careful when you're typing. For example, if I go ahead and I miss out the closing double quote, well, now you can see that there's some changes that have happened to our code already. Namely that the last parentheses, instead of being colored in white like the opening parentheses or how it used to be, it's now colored in orange. And this is a subtle hint to us. You're going to get really attuned to these subtle hints because they are the clues that will tell you what might have gone wrong in your code. If I run this code as it is right now, it's going to break. It's going to give me a syntax error. And it says something that seems like it's completely not English. So how can we figure out what this means? Now, the thing I want you to know is that all programmers make mistakes. We all make lots of errors, like forgetting to add the double quotes at the end of the string, or forgetting to add a closing parentheses. These things are just common errors because we're human. But the thing that differentiates great programmers is we're really good at figuring out what the problem is and how to fix it. So you can imagine that coding is just a whole bunch of problems that you have to solve. And in this case, when we get some sort of red text on the right and our code is not doing what we expect it to do, then all we have to do is take this entire error message where it says something, something error, and this is some sort of message that we're supposed to understand. And we're simply going to drop it into Google. And usually the first link you come across will be from a website called stackoverflow.com. And this is basically the Q&A website that all developers will go to whenever something is wrong with their code or when they can't figure out how to do something. So if we click on this link, you can see that somebody else has also had this error, and some kind souls have told us that the solution might be the fact that you're missing a double quote before the end of the line. So if we take a look back at our code, the code that generated this error looks like this. And indeed, we are missing a double quote at the end of our string. As you're learning to code, as you're going through your 100 days, I want you to become more and more attuned to the color of your code. Because one of the most helpful things that code editors such as this do for us is something called syntax highlighting. For example, when I was missing that double quote, it highlighted this entire thing in this orange color. And that is basically it telling us, it seems like this whole thing is some text. It thinks that all of this is a string and that we're missing a closing parenthesis. So if you notice this and you're like, wait, actually, that's not right. This part should be orange because this is what I want to be printed. But this part should match the color of the open brace, which is white. So there must be something wrong here. And indeed, if you have a look at the error message, it actually has a little caret sign right here showing you that there's something that's probably not right here. And it might jog your memory that, oh yeah, I've forgotten a closing double quote. And now when we run our code, you'll see that it's good as new. So now it's your turn to try it out in a code challenge. Head over to the next lesson, sign up to our classroom, and then I'll guide you through getting started on your first coding challenge. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Throughout this course, we'll be getting you involved in a lot of these interactive coding exercises. And the idea is that you're not just sitting here watching me talk, that you're actually putting everything you're learning into practice. That way, it actually becomes your own. These are great because we can give you instructions and show you what should happen if you write the correct code, what it needs to do, and you'll be able to write your code as well as see it run in the console. Once you're done with your code, you'll be able to submit it and see the tests run. And if you've written the code correctly, then all of the tests will pass. If your code isn't doing what it's supposed to, then when you click submit, you'll get feedback and you'll see what it's meant to do and what your code is actually doing. So you'll be able to use that to figure out what's wrong and fix your code. And it's through a lot of these exercises that you're going to level up and you're going to become a better coder. Now, in order for you to get set up on our coding rooms, we're going to have to get you signed up and registered with our course. So in order to do this, I want you to first head over to codingrooms.com and then sign up for a student account. Now, this is completely free, and all you have to do is just to click sign up, put in your email and password, and then you can choose student for this question, who are you? And then put in your first name and last name and click finish. Next, in order to get hold of the joining link, I want you to go to the course resources for the current lesson on Udemy. So the lesson is Interactive Coding Exercise Printing. And then I want you to click on the drop-down list and you should see step 1, sign up to Coding Rooms, which you should have already done. And then step 2 is join our coding room. So I want you to click on that link. And once you've clicked on that link, then it should automatically enroll you into our 100 Days of Code, the complete Python Pro Bootcamp. And you should now be able to see every day's corresponding interactive coding exercises. So for example, on day 1, there are 4 exercises and they are named exactly the same as what you see in Udemy. So this is interactive coding exercise 1, which is printing, debugging practice, input function, and variables. And you see all the same ones over here that you'll be able to attempt. Now, the next time when you log in, all you have to do is just go into your courses and you should see the interactive coding exercises for the 100 Days of Code, and you will be able to continue where you left off. Now, let's get started with the first exercise. That's the objective of this lesson. So we're going to go into day 1 and it might be collapsed. If so, just go ahead and expand it and then click on exercise 1, printing. And here you see the instructions for what you need to do in order to complete this coding exercise. Now I want you to go ahead and click on Open Assignment Workspace. And here you'll be able to see the instructions on one side of the pane. You'll be able to have your main.py, which is where you write your code. So all the lines below here, you can just type your code out. And then once you're done writing your code, I want you to test it by running your code. So hitting this run button, and you'll see the result of your code being run in the console down here. Now, once you think you've completed the coding exercise according to all the instructions over here, I want you to go ahead and test your code. And you can test your code by simply hitting submit. Now, don't worry about all of this where it says the submission will count towards your grade for the assignment. There are no grades, there's no time limits. Nobody is going to check what you've done. It's all for the benefit of your learning. So you can submit your code as many times as you like. So once you hit submit, it's going to run the automated test that we've set up behind the scenes, and it's going to check to make sure that your code is doing what it's supposed to. So for example, in this case, my tests have not passed because there's a cross here. And note that sometimes there'll be more than one test, so you can scroll down and see the other ones. And the reason why I didn't pass, as they've shown here, is this is my actual output. This is what my code did. And this is what the expected output is supposed to be. And there's a whole bunch of differences. This does not look like this. So then we have to go and fix it. And I've left some feedback in some of the lessons to help you in case you get stuck. But also there are hints in some of the instructions. So just make sure that you read everything. Now, if you want to, or if you get really, really stuck, you can take a look at the solution. Now, I don't recommend looking at the solution code unless you're actually just checking to make sure that something hasn't gone majorly wrong, or you're not completely stuck, or just for whatever reason. I really, really want you to persevere and try your best to actually write the code yourself and to solve the issues and to figure out how to make all the tests pass. But if you need to look at the solution, they are available on Replit, so just click on this link and it'll take you to the solution page. In order to see the files, you can either fork the REPL as you have done before, you'll get a copy of this solution file, or what I think is much simpler is simply click on Show Files and then click on this main.py file. And then you will see the solution code on this page without having to fork a copy of this REPL. But you can do it any number of ways. Whichever way suits you best is fine. Now, once you have written your code correctly, you should be able to see all the tests pass. And by passing, it means that there's a little tick along each of these. And you can see in this one, there's only one test and this is passed. So you get a score of 100%. And the actual output that your code has created in the console now looks exactly the same as expected. So you are now done and you can go back to your other assignments and you can continue. So this is a really simple interface, and we've switched to this from Replit because Replit actually disabled their classroom technology, which looks basically exactly the same as this, and we wanted to provide you the best learning experience possible. So we've switched over to Coding Rooms, and you should be able to sign up and get started without any issue. Now remember, at the end of the lesson, I will go through the solution with you step by step, explaining the solution as well. So if you get stuck, don't worry, I'm here for you every step of the way. But now it's time for you to pause the video and make sure that you've signed up for Coding Rooms already, registered for a student account, and then click on the link in step 2 in the course resources and sign up for our course. And then go over to the first exercise, printing, and give it a go. All right, pause the video now. All right, how did you get on? I really hope you gave this a good go, because it's in these moments where you're going to be learning the code. Unfortunately, no amount of listening to me talk is actually going to give you these skills. It's only when you actually try it out and get the computer to do the thing that you want it to do, that's when you become the master of the computer, also known as a programmer. So in this case, the instructions are pretty simple. We have to use what we learned about the print statement to output these 3 lines. And notice how in this GIF, the lines are printing out in separate lines. This one gets printed, then this one, then this one. But because it happens so fast, it seems like as if they're getting printed as a single block. So we're told to write our code below this line. And we know that in order to print something, we use the print function with a set of parentheses. And inside the parentheses is where we tell it what we want it to print. So in the first instance, it's day 1, space, then it's... Now, it's really easy to make spelling mistakes, but I really encourage you to actually type out anything that you put into your code rather than just simply copying and pasting it. Now, of course, it works exactly the same way. I could just copy and paste the code in here, but it's often in these cases where you make mistakes, like, for example, forgetting to add the double quotes around the text that you want to print. I really recommend just typing out the code for practice whenever you're doing these code challenges. Now, the last line that we want to print is a little bit complicated. It's almost like print inception, because what we want to print is this function. This is how we write our function. And that has to go inside here, inside a set of double quotes. So let's open up our double quotes and then write our print statement. And in this case, I'm actually using a single quote, and I'll tell you just in a little moment why that is. So let's add that single quote and finally the closing parentheses. This now is the entire code that you would need to be able to print something out. And when I go ahead and click run, you can see that the output looks exactly the same as what we've got here in the GIF. This is what we want. And when I click submit, you'll see that my tests all pass, and I can now submit my assignment, and I've now completed the coding challenge. Now, coming back to this single quote, why is it that I've got a single quote here rather than a double quote, which is what we've been using all this time? Well, because in Python, it doesn't actually care whether if you enclose these strings, so these pieces of text that are not to be interpreted as code, inside single quotes or inside double quotes. It is identical to the computer. This honey badger literally doesn't care. But if you had a set of double quotes and then you wanted another set of double quotes inside the double quotes, so for example, if I replace this with double quotes, you'll see that already the syntax highlighting is already screaming out to us. There's something that's not quite right here, because the colors are not the same as here, where the print function is in a particular color, the parentheses are in a particular color, and the text that is to be printed is in a yet another different color. In this case, it looks all jumbled up, and we're getting some errors here. So now if I hit run, you'll get syntax errors. And the problem here is, of course, our code thinks that the end of this string is here. And so it doesn't know what on earth is going on afterwards. And instead, it's seeing this as a string, this as a string, and this is being interpreted as code. So when we want to use some double quotes inside another set of double quotes, commonly you'll see people switch to single quotes instead. So you could, for example, write the print statement like so and use double quotes if you want to print those out. Or you can do it the other way, which is what I had before, where we use our double quotes on the outside and single quotes on the inside. So have a play around with that if that's at all confusing. But once you've tried it a few times and switched it around a few times, it should become clear what it's actually doing. How did you get on with this challenge? If you ever need to see the solution, it's always down here as a link. So I hope you enjoy this challenge. In the next lesson, we're going to get back to learning about Python, and we're going to learn about strings and string manipulation. For all of that and more, I'll see you there. All right, guys, let's get back to learning about a few more things that we can do with strings. You saw in the last lesson that if we wanted to print things on individual lines, then we actually had to write them a few times, right? We had to write print on 3 lines if we wanted it to be printed 1, 2, 3, like so. Now, in this lesson, I want to show you a method where we can do the same thing, but by using a single print method, so saving ourselves a few characters. So the way that we would create a new line is by writing a backslash and the N character. And now if I go ahead and write hello world again afterwards and I hit run, or you can always use the shortcut, which is Command Enter on Mac or Control Enter on Windows. And you can see that once that line of code has been executed, I've got hello world printed on 2 separate lines, separated by this pink backslash N character, which gets replaced by a new line. So go ahead and give that a go and see if you can create another one. Remember though, it's a backslash and not a forward slash, but the syntax highlighting should help you. All right, we can simply just add another backslash N, and remember that unless you want a space to appear right before where your hello world appears, you actually don't want any gaps between each of these lines. There we go. We've got the same result as before, but now using only a single print statement and creating some new lines with the backslash N. Now, one of the other things that we can do with strings is we can concatenate them. What this means is we combine different strings so that they will be added to the end of another string. Here's an example. Let's say that we had the word hello, and I wanted to add my name to the end of this word to make it a single string. Well, I can combine 2 strings by simply using a plus sign. So I can write hello plus Angela. Now, here's a question. When this runs, what do you think it will look like? Do you think it'll write hello space Angela or hello Angela all in one word? Let's see what happens. You can see that these 2 strings have now been combined into one, and there's no space in between because we don't have a space character anywhere in here. Pause the video and see if you can add a space in between. All right, so there's 2 ways that you can do this, or maybe 3 actually. You could add a space to the end of hello, you could add a space to the beginning of Angela, or you can actually continue using string concatenation by simply adding another string in between these 2, and this one is just a space. So now when I run my code, you can see the space gets inserted, and this long thing gets combined into a single string that looks like this once this bit of the code gets executed. If we think of strings as a string of connected characters, then string concatenation is simply taking those separate strings of characters and merging them into one. Now, this is a good point to mention that in Python programming, spaces are really, really important. And what I mean by this is not so much the spaces that are inside strings like this one, but the spaces that you add in your code. So here, my print statement, if I hit the backspace, you can see that nothing happens. I can't go any further back. But if I added a space or if I added a tab using the tab key, then you'll see that when I try to run my code, I actually get an error. And the type of error this time is not a syntax error anymore. It's now an indentation error. And it says that there's an unexpected indent at this position, right at the beginning of the print statement. So when you're coding in Python, it's really important that you start off all of your code at the beginning of the line and that you don't accidentally have any spaces or any tabs that you've inserted in front of the line of code. And the next time you get an indentation error, then you'll be able to look at where that error is, and hopefully you'll be able to either use Stack Overflow or just remember what this error message means, and you'll be able to fix your code. Now, this is the second error that we've come across. The last error was a syntax error. For example, when we forgot to add the end double quotes. And this one is called a syntax error, and this one is called a indentation error. And as I mentioned before, while you're coding, you are going to make lots and lots of these errors and other ones. This is the only sure thing that we know. So it's great that you're already learning about them and recognizing them, but how can we prevent this from happening in the first place? Well, paying attention while you're typing helps, but we all get tired, and sometimes, especially when I'm coding at night, sometimes even when I look at my own name, it looks like it's spelt wrong, and I can't figure out left from right. So in most cases, text editors have a lot of helpful features. If you go into the settings bar here and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see that there's something called Code Intelligence. And Code Intelligence is something that is going to help you autocomplete some of the functions, like our print function here, and give you some helpful information or hints as you type. So let's go ahead and change it to enabled and close down our settings pane. And you can see now, if I, for example, forget to add my double quotes, then I already start to get a little red squiggly line here and a little red bit in the right hand side of the scroll bar. And if I hover over the red squiggly line, you can see that it gives me the error that I would get if I ran my code right now. And so it reminds me that, oh yeah, there's maybe something about my string that's not quite right. And you can also just Google these error messages and see it in Stack Overflow to remind yourself of what the error might be relating to. And I can fix it without having to run my code and having it break. Because remember that when you're writing large programs, it's not just going to be one line of code. You could have multiple lines of code, each with their own errors. For example, this one might be missing a double quote. This one might be missing a plus sign. This one might have the print function misspelled. The next one might have a indentation that's not meant to be there. And when you run your code like this, it'll only give you the first issue. Once you fix that issue, it'll continue to the next issue until you've fixed everything. And this is really painful. But with Code Intelligence enabled, every time we make an error, such as a indentation error like this, then we'll be able to hover over it and you'll see unexpected indent. So we'll be able to fix that. If we forget to close off our print statement, then we'll get a little squiggly line next to it. And if we say misspelled our print statement, we'll also get errors telling us that undefined name, or it doesn't know what this PRNT is. And the syntax highlighting also changes, and everything should all help you to avoid mistakes and write good, solid code. So now it's time for another code challenge. And in this code challenge, I've got a whole bunch of broken code for you, and your job is to debug or remove the bugs from the code and make the code run without any errors. This word debugging actually comes from a story where back in the 80s, a moth actually flew into one of the early computers and it got electrocuted, unfortunately, for the moth. And for the programmer, it meant that his code wasn't performing as he would expect it to. So he actually had to go into the computer, pick out the moth, and fix the wires so that it would work again. Now, we don't have any moths flying around in our code, thankfully, but what we do have to do is we have to pick out the errors so that our code will run in the way that we expect it to, without any errors. So head over to the next lesson and try out your first debugging exercise. To begin, I want you to locate the day 1.2 debugging exercise. And now, as you did before, go ahead and read through the instructions. Be mindful that the output must match the example output precisely. And when you hit run, this is the outcome you're looking for. So there's quite a few things broken here, but I want you to have a go at fixing each line individually and pulling out the bugs from the code. So pause the video now and give that a go. All right, so how did that go? If you haven't got your computer in front of you, if you're traveling, if somehow you can't access the exercise, just pause, and when you've got time, then complete the challenge and then come back to the course. It is so important that you actually do some hands-on stuff, and I stress that this is the only way that you're going to become the rockstar coder that I know you can be. Let's take a look at the code below. You can see that when we run our code as it is right now, we get an error, and this is going to point to the first of many errors in this file. And in this case, it tells us that on line 3, so this one right here, at around this position or somewhere around here, as denoted by the little caret sign, there is a syntax error. If we study this closely, you can see that the code highlighting seems to be suggesting that all of this is code, but this is somehow text. So what's going on here? Well, notice that we've only got one double quote. So it thinks that what comes after this is the text, but what comes before it, it thought it was just continuation of code. So to fix this one, all we have to do is add a double quote right here. That changes the text to the color that we're used to, and this fixes this line. So if we run our code now, we should get a different error, and indeed we do. The next one tells us that on line 5, so this one right here, there is an indentation error. There's an unexpected indent somewhere around here on line 5. So let's take a look at line 5, and there you go. There's a little bit of extra space between the print and the beginning of the line. So now that we've fixed that one, let's click run, and it will point to another line of code that's broken. And in this case, it says on line 7, which is here where there's actually no code, there's the unexpected EOF while parsing. What does this mean? Well, if you're not sure, then go ahead and paste it into Google. And let's take a look at what people say on Stack Overflow. So as this person, very kind, Felix, has explained, the syntax error unexpected EOF while parsing means that the end of your source code was reached before all code blocks were completed. What is a code block? Well, this is a code block because it's a print function, it has a beginning, and it has an end. But what does this line not have? Well, it's got 2 open parentheses, but only 1 closing parentheses. So the computer thinks that you're going to continue writing something and then close it off at the end, which is not the case. In fact, what has happened is we simply have an extra misplaced open parenthesis. And now if we delete that and hit run, you'll see that we have everything printed. But at this point, notice how on line 4, which is the line that we haven't fixed yet, it prints string concatenation is done with the blank sign, whereas in fact it should say plus sign. And even though we don't see any errors being printed in our console, you'll see that we have an output mismatch, because I'm expecting to see this line, string concatenation is done with the plus sign, but here the output doesn't have that part, is missing this part. So there's one last thing that you need to debug, and that is of course on line 4. And what's happening here is we have this part being interpreted as a string, this part being interpreted as a string, and it thinks that this plus sign is just us concatenating these two parts together, which is why it printed out like this. But in fact, what we wanted to print out is this as text down here. So what we have to do is to change this outer part from double quotes into single quotes. And now you can see when it highlights this part, it's all the same color, including the plus sign. Now it sees this as a complete string, and it's not looking at this as if it's code. So now if we run our program, you can see the entire sentence being printed out. So if you've completed the challenge and you've gotten everything right, then you're now done with this exercise. If you got stuck and you want to have a look at the solution, as always, it's down here. And it might be useful to have a look at this page to see where you might have missed something or where you might have gotten something wrong. So I hope you enjoyed this code exercise. In the next lesson, we're going to learn about a new type of Python function, which is the input function. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there. Coming back to our replet, the day 1 printing REPL that you should have from previously, I want to talk about a different function. So we've seen the print function and all the things that we can do to strings and use the print function and debug it. But what if we wanted to be able to enter some data? So if we wanted to say, ask the user, what is your name? And when we run this code, you can see that being printed. But there's no way for the user on this side to be able to give our code some data to work with. In order to do that, instead of using the print function, we're going to use a different function, and it's called the input function. And notice how as I'm typing, Code Intelligence is already giving me some suggestions because it thinks it knows what I might want, and it's right. So this is what the input function looks like. This is the name of the function, and again it's followed by some parentheses. Inside the parentheses is the prompt that I'm going to give the user. So when I run this code, it will say, what is your name? And then the cursor will stay at the end of this line because it's expecting some sort of input. If I give it my name, Angela, and I hit enter, then this piece of data has now been passed back into my code, and it now replaces this part of the code. So I'm passing data from over here back to over here, where I can use it in my code. Now, notice the difference here. It looks quite similar. When we run print, you can see it says, what is your name? And then the code execution ends. And we know it ends because it's showing us this little orange arrow. But notice when I run input instead, I don't see the orange arrow. My program is actually paused right now in order for the user to provide an input. And it's only when I've given the input and hit enter does the program end. The input function looks pretty much identical to the print function, but instead of the word print, it's just got the word input. And inside the parentheses, instead of adding what text will be printed, we're adding the prompt for the user to give them a hint as to what kind of data we want. And then when you run this code, it will print out the prompt, but then there will be a cursor. In some places, you'll see it like a flashing cursor. Other places, it'll just be a solid cursor, ready for the user to type in some piece of data. So what can we do with this data? Well, we can use it inside our code. Remember how I said, once this line of code executes and I've entered Angela as the response to this input, then this part of the code gets replaced by whatever it is that the user typed in. So in this case, it becomes Angela. And what I can do with it is, let's say I wanted to print something like, hello, Angela, well then I can simply write hello plus inputs, and then I'm going to close it off with another set of brackets. So I'm going to change my layout. Instead of side by side, I'm going to change it to stacked. And this means that I've got my code at the top and my console at the bottom. This way my line can go a little bit longer without it wrapping. Notice what's happening here. This is the input function that I showed you earlier on, and this is a print statement. So we've got this nested inside the other. And now when I run my code, what happens is it asks me, what is your name? So I'll write my name. And then when I hit enter, this part is replaced by Angela, and it gets concatenated to the word hello, and the entire thing gets printed out down here. If you find this line of code difficult to understand and to wrap your head around, then I recommend heading over to a website called thonny.org and downloading an application called Thonny. It's completely free and it's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And once you've installed this application, you can go ahead and paste your line of code here and click on this little debug symbol. And then we can click on this button, which is called the Step Into button, to step into the execution of this line of code, to see how the computer is evaluating this code here, step by step. So you'll see the first thing it tries to do is it will try to run this print statement. It looks inside these parentheses to see what it needs to print. So the first thing is this hello, and it turns that into a string. And then it looks at the next thing after the plus sign to see what it should turn this into. And this, of course, is the input function. So as I continue stepping into it, it's actually going to execute it. So it's going to run this input function and show the prompt, what is your name? So that's what shows up down here. And now if I enter a value in here and hit enter, then that value that I put right there replaces that previous input function and is now held inside the print statement. So if I continue stepping through this code, then you'll see it concatenates all of the pieces together, and finally it just ends up with a simple print hello Angela exclamation mark. And if I continue stepping into it, you'll see that line of code executed until there are no more instructions left. So if you prefer seeing your code run like this step by step so that you can see what's going on, then I recommend giving this a go. But because of how easy it is to share these Replit code bases so that we're working from the same place, I recommend to do most of your coding here, and only if you get stuck to take a single line of code and paste it into Thonny to see how it's executed step by step. As you're learning to code, there's going to be new concepts covered. There's going to be things that take a little bit of thinking before you can understand it. So what a lot of programmers love to do is they like to comment in their code. Now, you might have seen this already throughout the coding exercises and the solutions I provided. But in Python, if you wanted a line of text to not be considered by the computer at all you have to do is add the hashtag or pound sign in front of your text. And this turns it into a comment, so something that the computer will completely ignore. So in here you can write code as much as you like, but it won't be executed. And when you click run, you'll see that this is completely ignored. What I recommend is whenever you come across a new concept in the course, to make a comment above it so that you can explain to yourself what's actually going on in the line of code below. This way, the next time you come across this line of code and you're not quite sure what's actually happening here, you can have a look at the notes that you've written for yourself in your own words, and hopefully it'll re-jog your memory and make it much easier to comprehend what's going on. In addition to adding a pound sign manually, you can also highlight a line of code or simply have your cursor on a line of code and hold down Command and / if you're on Mac, or Control and / if you're on Windows. And if you want to go back or undo your changes, it's simply Command Z or Control Z. All right, So in this lesson, we learned about the input function, we learned about putting functions inside other functions and being able to get user input from the console by using the input function. So now I've got a coding exercise for you in the next lesson. And if you've commented this line of code thoroughly and you've fully understood how it works, then you'll be able to breeze through the next exercise. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there. All right, so again, it's time to put theory into practice and get some hands-on action. You should be able to find the day 1.3 assignment, which is inputs. Click on it and you will see the instructions for this particular challenge. And the idea is that you're going to write a program that's going to print the number of characters in a user's name. For example, if I input my name, which is Angela, it should output the number 6 because there's 6 characters in the word Angela. But remember, you can't just print out the number 6 because when I'm checking for this code, I'm going to try a whole bunch of different names as the input. And you're going to have to use a little bit of thinking, a little bit of Googling, and also a little bit of messing around with the code in order to get it to work. If you need any help, there's a few hints down here for you. And if you really get stuck, then you can take a look at the solution, but not until you've really given it a go. And I really, really want to know that you've tried hard. And the whole point of these exercises is you sit there and scratch your head a little bit and actually give it a good go. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to let you pause the video and try to complete this challenge. All right, good luck. Okay, so how did that go? If you get stuck, I want to tell you the programmer's secret to getting unstuck, which is go and grab yourself a cup of tea, have a quick break, look at something else for a little moment, think about something else, and then come back to it. Well, the tea part is optional. Well, at least if you're outside of England, it's optional. So let's get started solving this challenge. So the idea is that we're going to create a program that counts the number of characters in any user's name. And that name is obviously going to come through an input function. And then we're going to use a function that calculates the length of a string, and we're going to send that out as the output. The first thing we'll probably need is some form of input function, right? And the prompt that we're going to give the user is what is your name or something similar that asks them for their name. And I like to add a space at the end of the prompt. This way, when you run it, you don't actually have that cursor straight next to the question mark, which looks a bit weird. But either way, once we've entered an input, then this part gets replaced by that input and we're going to do something with it. We're going to calculate the length of that string. Now, using our eyes, we can obviously see that it's 6 characters long, but what if you have a really long name? So let's go ahead and take a look at how we might figure out how to get a function that calculates the length of a string. I've actually included the Google search that you might need to use. And so let's just paste that URL in here and you can see that we're searching for how to get the length of a string in Python and we're trying to get results from Stack Overflow. The first result is a question that seems to pretty much match exactly what we want. And the answer from user 225312 tells us that you need to use the len function. And the way that you use it is by passing the string inside the parentheses. Now, this part might look a little bit different from what you're used to with the equal sign and everything, but I have confidence that if you mess around with this code, you'll be able to figure it out. Just like what we did with print or input, the len function also has a set of parentheses, and it will work its magic on whatever it is that we put inside the parentheses. If I just put my name, Angela, here, let's just comment out the previous line, and I go ahead and print the result of this, and then I hit run, you can see that it prints 6. Now, if I change that to Jack, then you'll see it prints 4. So it will print whatever it is the length of the string that I've put inside the len function. So we're getting close now, right? Because instead of printing out a string that I've hard-coded here, what I want is to take the input that the user has given me. So something like this. Now, if you want to, you can actually add some spaces inside here just to make it a little bit clearer for yourself as to what's actually going on, because there's 3 functions here that are all nested inside each other. So this is the first one. This is the one that's going to get the input from the user and replace this part with whatever it is that they type down here. Then that string gets calculated using the len function to get the length of that string, and then that number will get printed by the print function. Now let's go ahead and hit run and let's give it a go. So let's try Jack, hit enter, and it tells us that it's 4. But using the same line of code, if we try a different name, Angela, then it prints out 6. How did you get on with this? If you got stuck, then have a look at the solution replit, where you'll be able to find the code that I've written here and a little bit of explanation as well. The important thing is that you really play around with this code, try things and make it break and make it work, and just get it to do what you want it to do. And remember that if you ever want to visualize these things and the order of execution, then you can always use Thonny to see that. So let's go ahead and step in. You'll see that it goes through len, input, and then it's going to carry out this functionality. Input, I give it my name, hit enter, then it puts that inside the len function like so. So now the next step is this part. We're going to calculate the length of this string. And as I continue stepping into it, you can see that becomes 6. And finally, we're going to carry out the final instruction, which is just to print 6 down here. Again, this can be quite useful just to visualize all the steps that are happening, if you want to. Once you're done, head over to the next lesson, and I'm going to talk to you all about Python variables and how we'll be able to identify pieces of data in our code. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there. Now, in this lesson, I want to talk to you about Python variables, and it's a really, really useful concept. But before we get started, first, I want you to head over to the course resources and get hold of the Day 1 Variables Start Replit Sandbox. Or you can simply type the URL into the browser. I want you to first go ahead and fork this starting code so that you can work on your own version of it. Now, once you've done that, then the first thing I want to do is to take a look at this line of code that you should have already. And when we run this, we should be pretty familiar with what happens, right? It will ask us for our name, and when we hit enter, nothing happens. But behind the scenes, this name or this input has now been received by this function. But once that's done, it kind of just disappears, right? And there's no way for us to be able to refer to it in the future. Or is there? Well, this is where variables come in really handy. If I give the result of this action a name, well, then I'll be able to refer to it later on. So at the beginning of the line, I'm going to call it name, and then I'm going to add an equal sign. And what this does is it assigns whatever it is that the user typed in as the input to this prompt to a variable called name. So now, if I go ahead and run my code again, and I enter a name, now once I hit enter, normally there's no way for me to get hold of this anymore, right? But now I can actually go ahead and write print. I'm going to print the value of this variable name. So now if I run my code and I write a name, hit enter, you'll see that this gets printed. And I can use this at any point in my code just by referring to the name that's attached to this value. So it's almost like we've saved the data from this action to a name. And if you think about it, if you had a phone book, let's say, and you just jotted down the numbers of people, the next time you look at this, there's no way for you to know whose number that is, right? In a sense, it's the same thing with the computer. Even though we've inputted this piece of data, there's no way for us to be able to refer to this data unless we give it a name. So in our phone book, we might say that this particular number is associated with the name James. And in programming, we would call this name James a variable. So we could write something like James equals and then his phone number. And this means that in the future, if we ever need this piece of data, we can just refer to it by its name, the variable name of James. Now, as the name variable suggests, it's something that can be changed or can be varied. So, for example, just because this name is set to something up here doesn't mean that I can't change it later on. So, to make things simple, let's go ahead and delete the input function, and let's just say name is equal to Jack. Print name. When I run that, Jack is what gets printed inside the console, because I'm now referring to that piece of data by the variable name. But if later on I decide to give this variable a different piece of data to hold on to, let's say Angela, and I print name at this time point after I've changed it, what do you think these two lines will print? What do you think will first be printed? What do you think will be printed second? Let's hit Command Enter or Control Enter and see for ourselves. So even though they're both printing the same variable, at this point, when we first call print, it's holding on to the value of Jack. But by line 5, I've now changed it so that it's holding on to the value of Angela. This makes it a lot easier when we want to write code like what we did before. For example, this is the line of code that we had before, and we knew that we were going to get a piece of data from this input function, and then we would calculate a new piece of data using the len function, and finally we're going to print everything out. Instead of having such a long line of code, which can be quite confusing, we can, if we wanted to, use variables to store each of these steps. So for example, we could say that the name was equal to whatever the user inserted as the inputs, and then when we wanted to calculate the length, then we could set that variable to equal the len function, and then inside the parentheses, we'll pass in the name, the value that's stored in the name variable right here. And finally, all that we need to do is to print the length, like so. So in this case, this data is stored under this name, and then that data is what's going to be used in order to carry out this function, and then the result will get stored in yet another variable, and finally that variable will be printed out. So let's go ahead and run this code and type in my name, so Angela, and hit enter, and it does exactly the same thing. But now we've got all of these pieces of data all associated with a name that we can refer to at any later point in our code. Now it's time, you guessed it, for a code challenge. And I'm going to get you to apply what you've learned. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, guys, it's time for your final coding exercise. So click on day 1.4 variables. Now, the aim of the game is to switch the values of these two variables around. So if we go ahead and run our code as it is, it's going to ask us for a value of A, let's call it 5, and then it's going to ask us a value for B, let's call that 100. And then when I hit enter, what you want the code to do is to go ahead and print A equals 100 and B equals 5. So basically switch those values around. And you're going to have to write your code in here. And it's really, really important that you don't change any of the code here or the code here. Now, it's easy enough to simply just write print A equals B and B equals A, but this doesn't test you on anything. This is not the solution. This is wrong. Don't change the code here. Don't change the code here. Instead, all you have are these lines where you can write as much code or as little code as you need to achieve this end. And when you achieve it, it should look something like this. You type a value for A, you type a value for B, and when you hit enter, they get printed out but switched around. Have a think about how variables work, how they store data, and if you get really stuck, imagine that you have two cups. One holds a cup of milk, one holds a cup of coffee, and you want to switch the contents of the cup around. How would you do that in real life? And then try and see if you can apply that logic to the code. Pause the video now and give this a go. All right, so I hope you didn't cheat and instead you actually had to think about this problem. If you got stuck, remember how I said if you have a cup of coffee and you have a cup of milk and you want to switch the contents of the cups around, how would you do this in real life? Well, you would probably get a third cup, right? And then you'd be able to shift the contents around. So that's exactly what we're going to do with our code as well. We can create a new variable called C, and we can set that to equal the value that's stored inside A. And then later on, we can get the variable A to store the value that's currently inside B. And finally, we're now ready to get B to store the value that was previously inside A, which is now contained inside the variable C. These three lines achieve this little switcheroo that we've got here. And this is one of the most common programming interview questions that you'll come across. And the code is super simple, but what you have to apply here is some logic. And I usually think about real life examples like the cups, and I hope that helped you as well. If this was at all confusing, then have a go trying this out in Thonny. But if you got it right, then congratulations. This was actually quite a hard challenge. You had to think about a lot of things and think outside the box as well. So give yourself a pat on the back if you got it right. If you didn't get it right, then I really recommend to put this code inside Thonny and see how it's being moved around so that you really understand what's going on behind the scenes. And then you can move on to the next lesson, where we're going to talk about some of the rules around naming variables. For all of that and more, I'll see you there. Now, when it comes to naming your variables, you can pretty much call it whatever it is you want. So instead of calling this name, I could have just called it N, and I could have called this L, and as long as I'm consistent, so if I wanted to get the length of N, then I would have to change this as well, and if I wanted to print out L, then I have to change this as well. But there's a couple of rules that you should probably follow, and the most important one is to make your code readable. Because if you come back to this in 6 months, 12 months, N and L is not going to have a lot of meaning for you. So try to make sure that it actually makes sense to you. And if you want to, you can actually have multiple words in the name of your variable. So for example, if you wanted to call this username, then you would write the word user, and then you would separate each of the words with an underscore. But you can't have a space in between. This is not valid code. And if you try to run it, you'll get a syntax error. So the name of the variable has to be one single unit. And in order to separate words in Python, we use the underscore. Now, if you want to use numbers in the name of your variable, you can. So for example, length 1, length 2, but they can't be at the beginning of the name of the variable. So you can't say 1 length or 3 length. That will generate a syntax error as well. Finally, there's certain privilege words that we use, for example, the names of our functions like print and input. And it's usually good practice to not use them as the names of your variables, because you can see that syntax highlighting gets messed up because it thinks that it's actually an input function you're trying to create. And even though often when you run your app, it might not have any issues, this is really bad practice because it's very confusing. So try to make sure that all the names of your variables get highlighted like the other variables in the same color. Now, the final thing to remember is that if you decide to call your variable this particular name, N-A-M-E, and at a later point you make a typo and you spell it wrong. So maybe instead of name, you said nama. This is not going to work. And when you run your code, you'll get what's called a name error because it says this name is not defined. And the idea is that you would look at where the error is, line 2, print nama, and you'll see, oh, that's not right. It's meant to be spelled N-A-M-E. So you'll have to go and fix it in order for your code to work. Now, remember that this is not because Python is doing any sort of spell checking for you. It's like, oh, that's not how you spell name. No, in fact, if you decided to call this nama, and you later on use it as nama, there's no problems. There's no issues, no errors. As long as it's consistent, this is the name that's associated with this piece of data. Later on, when you want to use this piece of data, you use this name to refer to it. And as long as these two spellings are identical, then the computer doesn't care at all. So when you get a name error in your code, you now know it's probably because you've misspelled or mistyped one of the variable names somewhere in your code. Now, in the next lesson, I prepared a quiz for you where you'll get to select which variable names are valid and which ones are not good practice. Have a go at that over on the next lesson. All right, guys, it's time for the final project of today. So the program that you're going to be building looks a little bit like this, and you can check it out if you head over to this link, either by typing it in or heading to the course resources page and clicking on the corresponding link. But essentially, it's a band name generator, and it asks you for a city that you grew up in and the name of your pet, and then it combines those together and gives you the name of your band. There's a couple of things to note here. Firstly is notice when this input got triggered, the cursor actually showed up on a new line. So if I run this again, you can see it says, what's the name of the city you grew up in? And then the cursor is on the next line. And what I want you to do is to go ahead and head over to this starting project. So this is the URL, and it's also, of course, in the course resources. And once you head over here, you can fork this code and complete your own version. So there's a couple of steps in here as hints. If you don't want to see these and you just want to go by the end project, you can also just delete all of these. But the important thing is once you've completed this project, it should work exactly the same as the one that you see here. And in order to do this, you're going to have to apply everything that you learned today, including printing, inputs, variables, new lines, string manipulation, debugging, and a whole lot more. So this is the time to grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, pause the video, and tackle this final project. All right, guys, I hope you gave that a go and you were able to complete it. If you want to see how I've implemented it, or if you want to just check to see if you have any errors, or if there's something that you're unsure about, then continue watching and I'll go through the solution with you. The first step is to create a greeting for your program. In our case, it says, welcome to the band name generator. So that's exactly what I'm going to create. And we print these messages using the print function. So I'm going to say, welcome to the band name generator. And this, when I run it, will just print that message. Now the next step is to ask the user for the city that they grew up in. So in order to get some input from the user, we'll need, of course, the input function. And we're going to ask them using the prompt, which goes inside the parentheses, which city did you grow up in? So now when I hit run, it's going to ask me for the city that I grew up in, and I'm able to add a reply, like so. Now that data is just going to be lost to thin air unless I capture it and I give it a name. So I'm going to have to create a variable to hold on to the data that the user inputted. So we'll just call that city and then add the equal sign to assign whatever it is that the user typed in to this variable name. And now I have access to this city variable and I can print it or use it later on if I want to, like so. Now, the next step is to ask the user for the name of a pet. So we'll call that variable pet and we'll assign it the value that the user input for what is the name of a pet. Now, step 4 is to combine the name of the city and the pet and show them their band name. Now, there's quite a few ways of doing this, especially if you look around on the internet. But the way that you learn in today's lessons is using string concatenation. So we're going to do that. So we're going to use a print statement and tell them your band name could be, and then we're going to add the name of the city and then add a space and then add the name of their pet. So now when we run our code, it will ask us for the name of their city and then the name of a pet. And then it should combine those together and show us the name of our band. Now the final step is that the input cursor should show on a new line like this. So here's the cursor, but here's the input, just so that you get a bit of space and you're not typing it in directly after the prompt here, like what we have. So how do we do that? Well, you learned about modifying strings by creating a new line using the \n. And we can add that both to the end of the city input and the pet input. And now when we run our code, you'll see that the cursor now shows up on the next line and our program looks a lot better. So there you have it. This is how you solve this boss challenge. And this is how you create the band name generator project. So I hope you had fun with me today learning Python and a lot of the fundamentals of Python. And tomorrow I've got another jam-packed module of really awesome tutorials and code challenges and projects for you to sink your teeth into. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. So have a rest now and let your brain work on the things that you learned while you sleep. And I'll see you here bright and early. Good night and see you tomorrow.
Well done! You've just completed your first day. And remember that a journey of 1,000 miles can't begin without the first step. So congratulations on doing that and completing it. Now remember that the first few days might take a little bit longer than an hour to complete, just because I've got so much to teach you and so much to cram into each of these days. So it doesn't matter if you need to take a break in between or if you need to take a nap in between even. Just come back to it whenever you can, and you don't have to do it strictly in the day-by-day order. Now my hope is that you'll keep going and you'll come back tomorrow refreshed and you'll tackle the next day's subjects with the same vigor that you did today. So have a good rest and I'll see you tomorrow.